Hey, welcome to Radicalized Truth Survives. I'm Heidi Cuda. I'm here with Jim Stewartson, Sean Connor, Hi Fidelity, three of the coolest guys I know. We are an investigative show about disinformation, and we have so much work ahead of us on this episode. So let's just jump right into Frontloaded.
Frontloaded.
Yeah, so I do most of my best thinking at 2 a.m, and I was thinking about how our kind of our generic media has basically undersold the great information war, which we have been the target of for about 8 years, ever since that mafia state pulled some punk moves, and the West just kind of shrugged its, hands and kind of looked around at all the all the tentacles of corruption that we have allowed between our countries. And so what I was realizing was that we have underestimated and probably won't know the reality of the casualties of the Great Information War. That is a Carol Cadwalader term. We've underestimated the casualties. And what I mean by that is that I started kind of looking at my own family and the good people in my own family that I lost to, things like Fox News, which admittedly I was a part of a local station, so maybe I had a real firsthand view of that. But this was going to be my opener, but I just got back from watching a youth play in Hollywood where the 15 and 16-year-olds in Hollywood actually did a 3 or 4 hour play, basically indicting and attacking the what they deemed a fascist capitalist state. And it actually culminated in a school board meeting. And these kids are so sharp, and they pay attention to all the details. They're following what's happening with disinformation and where it's coming from. They completely did a major indictment of Fox News. They did an indictment of Tucker Carlson. And so what I'm saying to you is that the youth may indeed be the ones to save us. And I hope that it's not on their shoulders. I hope enough of us wake up, realize we're in the middle of the year number 8 of a great information war. We're losing people to propaganda, and I want them back. And the last thing I'll say is, and I've been talking to Jim about this a little bit, working in local politics in a nonpartisan race, I'm coming into contact with people from all across different, the whole political spectrum. And what I'm finding is that there are people who are watching the Tucker Carlsons of the world. And when I talk to them and engage them in a very kind way and I listen, I can see that person, that pre-Fox person right underneath the surface. And I want them back. And that's what I wanted to lead off with today with Frontloaded.
Excellent. It's both the good news and the bad news, right? It's all these people who've been sucked into this thing, but the good news is they're still there.
Yeah.
People can come out of it. It's just going to take a lot of patience, and it's going to take everybody getting involved. Yeah. But the first thing we have to do is make sure we have a democracy to care about in the meantime.
That's right.
What age were they? They were 15, you said?
Yes, 15 and 16. And so, I was like literally on the edge of my seat. I was like hissing and booing and cheering. I could not believe how smart and insightful these kids are. And there was a part of me sucking back tears because I feel so much that my generation has let them down. We were not paying attention.
So as in Hollywood, I'd be curious to see what if there's an equivalent production being put on right now in West Virginia somewhere. And compare the two,
I would say if there is something like what I saw today at the Silver Lake Theater with these incredibly brilliant kids, I would think that the southern ones might be underground, because this was bold. Oh my God, they were talking about genetic mutations, and they were indicting. They actually, very interesting, they had a character, and this was so cool. The character was the master of the universe of the town who owned the farm where they were doing these crazy genetic mutations, but he was also the anarchist playing an anonymous type character. So he was actually the person who was playing both sides, and he had spies within the community. Swear to God, he had spies within the community that were switching out the teas and switching out the poison, so these kids could have a chance of overthrowing their ultimately their community leaders, mayors, school boards. So as you can see, I'm excited.
It's native internet speakers that understand this, right?
Yeah.
Because the internet is very, very fucking designed to psychologically influence you, right?
Yep.
It's not designed for you to understand what the actual motivation and mechanics are. So the people who tend to to get it are people who were kind of born into it. I was born into it as an adult, as a very young adult. My entire career has been, internet networks and social behavior and how to create content to influence it. Mine has been in hopefully benevolent ways, but I understood it, which is part of the reason why I got into this. And I think kids, I look at my own kids and I see they're born into this language, and if they have the background and the ability to see it and not be influenced by it, they are going to be the ones to save us. They're the only ones, and women, but we have a lot to do, a lot of work to do, and we have to take
it's incredible.
Our youth,
I have not had a television.
We have to make them leaders. Sorry.
Yeah. These kids are going to be leaders. I'm sure of it. They're amazing. But no, I will say that I have not had a television for 16 years, and I am really proud of that. Everything I need to know originates in print in greater depth. I see the clips. I see the things I need to see. But this was a true indictment on television. And interestingly, interspersed with their words, which were very profound, and their indictment on what they're seeing with this disinformation war, were 60s musical interludes. And oh my God, the music of the 60s is the soundtrack to now. And it was just incredible. There was not a lyric that didn't sort of predict what we might be facing now. So yeah, I know I'm a bragging auntie right now, but I am very thrilled that I kind of thought I was going to lead with just sort of this: we are missing the boat if we're not understanding the depth of the casualties. They may not be on crutches, they may not have bandages on their head, but they should have bandages on their head, and they are disabled in my mind. But here we have these kids coming on strong, and so yeah, that's what's happening. So thank you guys for letting me lead with that, because I think it's actually going to play very well into the episode we have coming up, which features boots on the ground reporting from Kyiv from our reporter there, Paul Niland. So we're really excited about that. Okay, so Hi-Fi, what you got for us in word phrase of the week?
All right, so our word phrase of the week this week is food security. And what is food security? Food security is the measure of availability of food and a population's ability to access that food, right? I'm sure in America we've all heard the phrase food deserts, predominantly, inner city poor neighborhoods. They don't have grocery stores. They don't have food availability.
They have liquor stores.
Yeah, well. Let's not talk about the racial motivations of that just yet.
But literally it's backwards proportion of liquor stores.
Oh, absolutely. The reason, though, I wanted to bring this up is because we are going to be facing very shortly a global food security issue. We know that in Ukraine, Russia stole 60 million plus tons of wheat from Ukraine, and they have destroyed the farmlands of Ukraine, and Ukraine is a breadbasket of Europe. With that much food gone right now, the world only has 10 days of wheat available to them globally. This is very serious. This is very dangerous. And if you also look at the supply chain problems we've had, which may or may not be fabricated in the United States, food security is one of the biggest ways that civil violence occurs. And so I think we're going to be seeing a wave of civil unrest, civil violence, and attempted overthrow of governments around the globe because of food security?
Food starvation and and lack of food security is the number one reason historically for violence, right? Since then there have been more ways of sort of doing it, but if when you are hungry, when your family is hungry, all bets are off, right? If your kids are starving, any parents out there, it's over. You're going to do whatever it takes to feed them. And that is why violence becomes an option to people, because they're trying to save their families. And it becomes a vector for national civil violence. And I agree with Hi-Fi. We are close, not just internationally, but at home.
Yeah.
And this is the part where hold on. Well, this is the part where I tell our viewers, Hi-Fi, that probably 7 to 10 days from now, just like when Hi-Fi introduced Fifth Column and when he introduced, stochastic terrorism, 7 to 10 days from now, this is going to be all over the media, because the media does watch our little show. So keep that in mind. The other thing I wanted to say is Masha Gessen. I'm always up in the middle of the night catching up on things I haven't seen. She talked about the community in the block where Putin came from, where he spent much of his youth, and how they ate furniture because they didn't have food. So if you wonder sometimes about his insane gluttony, it could have something to do with the fact that in his hometown, people were actually eating furniture. So this is a real thing.
Well,
this is a real thing.
He knows the effect it has on people, right? He knows what it does to people, which is precisely why he's doing it, why he's forcing it, right? He didn't have to take that grain. He didn't have to, cause all this pain and terror. He's doing it intentionally. He wants to cause a global civil conflagration.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for keeping our eye on that.
The one thing I do want to point out to people is, what are you talking about food security? Actually, if you would look at Northern Africa, and the last really big food security event they had in Northern Africa actually led to something called the Arab Spring, where multiple governments were overthrown, and there was a lot of community violence and people died. So again, just be aware that it's out there. It's going to happen. Might want to put in a garden, folks. Just, hedge your bets.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Ominous but important. All right. So, why it matters.
Let's do why it matters.
Why does it matter? Why does it matter? Why high fidelity?
All right.
Yeah, you outdid yourself, man. That was great.
Yeah.
That was amazing, Sean.
Okay, so why it matters this week. Story number 1 is land of the free, home of the financial criminals. So USA, we're number 1. That's right. USA is number 1 again, except this time we're number 1 in enabling financial chicanery globally. The Tax Justice Center in Ireland recently released a report that shows that the United States is number 1 in enabling money launderers, tax evaders, oligarchs with stolen money, etc. We're number 1 globally for helping them hide their money. Good job. The other thing that this report pointed out was that the UK, if we actually include all of their overseas territories like the Isle of Jersey, the Isle of Man, the British Virgin Islands, etc., they would actually be number 1 in enabling financial crimes globally. And why this matters is we are the 2 of the premier democracies in the world. We are supposed to be countries with the rule of law. If we do not follow our laws, if our laws enable crimes to occur in which money can be moved around behind the scenes and used to manipulate people and populations, Are we really as good as we think we are? So that's why that story matters.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
we know we
there's
can do better.
a lot
That
of
is
laws
for
being
sure.
broken. A lot of laws being broken that are not being enforced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is the number
Yeah.
one way that democracies fall.
Yeah.
Right. And as we learned from the president of Estonia, we learned that they do not do financial real estate transactions with those who are hiding under shell companies because they don't want to enable money laundering, which we, of course, have enabled en masse through people like Trump. But I'm waiting for Marty to text me back. And if he does during the show, I'll update you, because we did sneak in to a must-pass defense bill at the very end of the Trump era, a wording that would actually lead to stripping the cover of the beneficial owners of shell companies. So they would have to be revealed. And if that can pass with some teeth, that would be a game changer. But I think it's still in progress. And if we get an update, I'll let you know.
Excellent. All right. So story number 2 this week is, Dear Internet, could we please not? These are actually 2 stories that come from one of my favorite technology websites. It's called The Register. It started as theregister.co.uk and is now theregister.com in the United States. It's a technology-based website. But 2 stories. One is about the sale of personal data on advertising marketplaces. And again, USA #1. Congratulations, America. You are #1 on this list. If you are an American, it is pretty likely that your personal data, everything about you, what websites you visit, what emails you have, who you email, who you chat with online, what you like on Facebook, Twitter, etc., it is all being auctioned off 784 times a day on average, sometimes up to 900 sometimes a day. So Congratulations, your data, everything about you, is being sold a lot. Now,
And that goes back to if it's free, we're the product, right? Hi-Fi?
That's right. That's right. If a site is free.
A lot of the reason they're selling that, and one thing I'll be getting into in later episodes, is for AI models. They use your information to create AI models that can figure out what your predilections are, how you're going to vote, everything about you, all your personality traits, etc. So everyone who's been online needs to understand that you are currently being modeled. You are a computer simulation right now that somebody can sort of turn on and figure out what it is you're going to do.
Wow.
That's right. I mean, one need only look at Cambridge Analytica's psychographic profiles, which use the Oceans model, to understand that this is a way for not just corporations, but also political organizations, intelligence agencies, you name it. It's a way for you to be targeted, because the more they know about you, the easier it is to manipulate you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the second part of this story, Dear Internet, could we please not? This is actually some good news. The FTC is finally putting a ruling in place that will stop educational software companies from collecting data on your children through their school educational software. Right now, I mean, that's a great thing. Right now, there is no law, there is no ruling stopping educational software companies from gathering data about your children and using that to target them, be it through online advertising or who knows, right? But the FTC is saying that's got to stop. There's absolutely no way that is allowed. You may not gather data on students, and you may not monetize it in any other way. So thumbs up to the FTC for that.
thumbs up. And I just want to point out two things. One, that Sean actually speaks in emojis, and I can see that now because Connor actually got me a decent laptop, so I'm not all wavy gravy and having to shoot from my hallway. So word up to that. And also, I think whenever there's good news on this show, Connor, we need some sort of ding, 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 ding. We need something that goes off to like let people know that
Good news alert.
Yeah,
Yay!
good news. Good news alert, and just know that there are people like us fighting back everywhere.
And actually, speaking of people fighting back, let's go to our third story for the week, because our third story for the week is big ups to down under. What is this about? Well, Australia finally, after 9 years, almost a decade of liberal rule. Now, remember, in Australia, the Liberal Party is actually more like our conservative GOP party.
Right.
And the Democratic equivalent in Australia would be the Labour Party.
Yeah.
And after 9 years, Labour, after having a number of scandals involving sexual abuse, sexual misconduct, trigger warning, pedophilia, they were finally voted out of office. I mean, this is a party whose prime minister, Scott Morrison, actually went on vacation and sat on a beach while half of Australia was literally on fire. So the people are finally tired of this, which is great. I'm glad to see it. And Labour will be able to form a majority government, it looks like, with only 32.8% of parliamentary seats right now. However, for them to make a stronger coalition, and the thing that I really find heartening about the elections in Australia is that the Green Party, who is very climate catastrophe focused, and other independent parties in Australia that are also very climate focused, very understanding that we have a huge problem and we need to handle our petroleum resources and do something about it. They actually scored between the Greens and Independents, they scored 22% of the vote. And that is absolutely massive for Australia. So bye to the bad guys in Australia. Looking forward to the future for Australia. And if you think about it, you know, when we had Sean on a few weeks back, you know, we were talking about how the Tories had just lost a massive number of council
500 seats. Yep.
There you go. I think people in democracies are finally starting to get it that we have been controlled by politicians who have too much time, too much money invested in petroleum resources. And if we are going to save our planet, we need to put different leaders in. And I think this is just a continuation of that. So more good news to end out.
Wow. Right on, Hi-Fi. Thank you for that. And we are going to head over to Mr. Connor and do some brief legal briefs.
Brief legal briefs.
There we go. The brief greens, the greenies.
The greenies.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about, hopefully you're not too exhausted with the abortion issue and Oklahoma House Bill 4327 specifically. And obviously that's modeled after the Texas law that they put in place with the almost full ban, or the ban after fertilization in Oklahoma. And the reason that I was started looking into this one because Heidi made me, while she was on her way home, she said somebody get in there and research that stuff. So I started looking at it, and I guess I had unintentionally been avoiding really digging into these bills and these laws just because I didn't want to know how bad it was. But oh Jesus, that was weird.
It's bad. I'll tell you that much.
It's bad. So a few things that I figured out that are in here that are going to be very problematic. One is if they define pregnancy as the moment of fertilization. That's going to be problematic for a whole number of reasons. The unborn child, right, means that a human fetus or embryo in any stage of gestation from fertilization until birth. So I did a little tweet about this, just doing a sort of logic problem in that there's so many people that struggle with infertility in our country in mass. And if you are attempting in vitro fertilization, you take the fertilization drugs the woman does to increase the number of eggs that are released per cycle. They do that, then they take the eggs and they inseminate the eggs in a petri dish separately, right? Each cycle to increase the chance of those catching or those taking hold. According to the letter of the law from this bill, if you were in that situation, each egg that's now fertilized, that's now an embryo that didn't take, has to be discarded. And under the letter of the law, that would technically be an abortion because it's the fertilized egg, it's even an embryo that they're not going to use. So that's unfortunately a very, I don't know what they're going to do about fertility clinics. It's going to be strange. The other particular piece that was infuriating was the statute of limitations on this is 6 years. This is by far the longest.
I think so.
This is my robot buddy.
Your robot's pissed.
He is. He just said, "I don't think so." See that little guy, little blue guy?
Hi, little fellow.
It's emo. He woke up anyway. 6 years is by far the longest in Oklahoma. You compare that to personal injury, which statute of limitations is 2 years, which is just unbelievable. I mean, Oklahoma is not a good place where you want to have some cases, you know.
No.
6 years, guys, is unbelievable. So if you're in Oklahoma, 5 years is for debt repayment, right? So of course they want a long time for that, and then 6 years for abortion or aiding an abortion. And the other last piece that was really disheartening was that if you bring a case and you lose, so I think someone is having an abortion and I file a case and I lose, the other person's attorney's fees can't get paid. So only if you, right? So if you're the claimant, can the attorney's fees get paid? So it's just there's no incentive, but it's going to be very difficult until this thing gets hopefully unwound from all the shit that it's caused so far.
Well,
so not only are we looking at lawfare against women, we're looking at rescinding their human rights, their civil rights, and the amount of science denial and ignorance involved in these laws. What the hell happened to my country? Where did these religious
it's not denial. It's not denial. Listen, we just saw a guy murder 10 people for great replacement theory.
Yeah.
That's the other side of great replacement theory.
Yeah.
They are forcing women to have children, to increase the number of white people.
Yep.
Yeah. Increase the surplus population.
Workers. Yeah. And so, if you win there's injunctive relief, obviously, which I don't know how they're going to handle that, if they're found, have engaged in that act or we're going to engage in the act. And the statutory damages are no less than $10,000. So it's a $10,000 minimum reward.
Well, I would like all teenage girls in Oklahoma to pick up a base and move to Southern California, which California is a sanctuary state. That's because we held on to our very blue governor. So you will get to have your rights here. And the reason I say pick up a base is because we need more punk rock bands in SoCal. So please.
Well, the world just needs more female bass players in general.
Let's on the other hand, right? What they want is to create red states and blue states.
Yeah.
Like literal red states and blue states for civil war. I mean, they really want to turn states' rights into a conflagration.
Right.
And this is the way to do it, right? To get everybody to run out of those states and get everybody who's in the cult to run in.
Right.
Actually, I'm just going to say this one more time because I keep saying this and I don't think people get it, but I'm going to say it. If all the women would simply stop having sex with men until men respect their rights as women, I think change might happen a little faster. Just a thought, just throwing that out there. Stop
And
sleeping
just
with
know
women.
that the majority of men do respect women's rights. The majority of this country does respect women's rights. This is a targeted attack in order to increase white male property owner votes, as Margaret Atwood taught us. They're trying to take away women's rights to votes.
And here's one last piece that was really kind of frightening and never occurred to me. They put it in here specifically because it did occur to them. It says, a civil action under this section may not be brought by a person who impregnated the abortion patient through an act of rape, sexual assault, or incest. So they're foreseeing someone thinking that this is a way to make money, right? Oh my God. It never even fucking occurred to me. And it's horrifying that they're seeing that level of progression in terms of this shit is going to get bad. I mean, they wrote into this that, if, it's a chill, it gives you chills that's now going to be a form of potential profit and money making, is really horrifying.
Do we know if this legislation came from, like a CNP funded, like American Legislative Exchange Council or something like that?
Most of these are cookie cutters, some more egregious than others. Yes.
The bounty is came from Texas, unfortunately. But I mean, this had never occurred to me. And once I read the sentence, I kind of had to put it away.
Well, just know that this is all part of a coordinated attack. This is what we learned from Nadine Smith from Equality, Florida. These are attacks on they try to go for the weakest members of the population, and that's why they go after gay rights. That's why they go after trans rights. And now, as she said very clearly, they are coming for you. That means all of us. So none of us can say, hey, it's not my problem. I'm not having kids. I'm older. I'm not worried. No, they're coming for everybody.
It's very, very true. To paraphrase Trotsky, you may not be interested in culture war, but the culture war is interested in you.
Yeah, that's right.
Speaking of which, kids, I know this is heavy because this is our world right now, but stay for Paul Niland, and I'll tell you why. He is going to give us a story that is so profoundly beautiful. In the middle of war, he is going to tell us what the spirit of the Ukrainian people is really about. And I would be shocked if you didn't shed just one little tear at least. All right. So I'm very excited. Jim has done some incredible investigative work. Let's get into Hellscape.
Jim Stewartson's Hellscape. Oh, fuck.
The scary new opening. Holy crap.
Wow.
That's pretty intense.
You caught your name on fire.
That's the first time I've seen this, everyone. That was amazing.
It catches your name on fire.
I'm going to invite Slayer on the show because I feel like they need to see that.
Pretty solid work, man.
Well done.
So today I'm going to talk about one little bit of disinformation that has caused an enormous amount of damage over 6 years. And it's a subject that is confusing, really confusing, and that is on purpose. This little bit of disinformation has been laundered through 10 or 12 different sort of major segments of the propaganda machine. And it's happening right now. Part of the reason why it came back to my attention is because it got all the way to Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, is currently using this little bit of disinformation that was planted 6 years ago on the left. And this is very important. So let's see, in October of 2016, there was a random WordPress that was put out, and the subject was Alpha Bank. So this little bit of disinformation that we're talking about, as most of you probably remember, and if not, you can just see it on Twitter right now, was that there was a speculation that there was some kind of pinging between Alpha Bank, which is a sanctioned Russian financial institution, Trump Tower and Spectrum Bank, which is owned by Betsy DeVos's family, who is Eric Prince's sister. So it had all of the good stuff for somebody on the left to get lots of hopium about, including me. I was like, that sounds right. Totally sounds right. Fucking obviously there's communication going on between Trump and the Russians, so maybe that's it.
Oh, yeah.
But the problem is it's bullshit, all of it. It's nonsense. It doesn't make sense logically, and the technical theory behind it is bunk. I spent a long time going over this shit. And these are real DNS records that were then expanded and manipulated to make it look like there was some kind of, major thing going on. But in reality, what it was pinging between the Russian Alpha Bank's email servers, who was sending promotional mail all around the world, which included Trump. Trump, was super friendly with the Russians, and he was getting spam from Alpha Bank, basically. So they took this. Okay, so importantly, that information, the information that Alpha Bank was connecting to Trump Tower, is private. No, people in public are not supposed to know what random people are looking up on the internet.
Correct.
And so which begs the question: how did these anonymous researchers who made up this story, who got these DNS logs and fucked around with them to make them look all sus, these Alpha Bank servers, how did these anonymous researchers who planted this story, how did they find out? Well, it's fairly easy to get this information if you have access to any of the devices in the domain name server network, which is large. So who has access? Telcos, like telco employees, large social networks, internet providers. There are a lot of companies that have sort of technical access to these DNS servers. Now, are all these contractors and employees in the government supposed to be running around, sniffing this network? No, they are not. The good news is, from any one of these devices, you can only get a partial stream, but apparently, these anonymous researchers had some DNS records and found this communication and decided to blow it up into this nonsense. So the question remains still to this day: who are these people who did this? There was one person who was identified named April Lorenzen, who ran a LARP called Tea Leaves, which managed to snooker a reporter from Slate to pushing this story. But it's all based on a bunch of gobbledygook numbers and whatnot. Yes, there is some real DNS things going on in there, but it just got tossed around in the press and online and on Twitter and everywhere else, and it turned it into a big mess. So that all sort of died down. But then in March of 2017, my old friend Louise Mensch picked it up. All of a sudden, out of the blue, Louise Mensch is like, yes, we're going to talk about Alpha Bank and DNS logs and shit, right? And the reason is because Louise Mensch is a fucking op. Because the point of Louise Mensch is to make shit up and confuse people on the left. And she decided to push this Alpha Bank nonsense because it was false and because it sounded super good to lefties. And so she infected the resistance with this nonsense, right? So not only was it Louise Mensch, but some other good friends of mine. Conspirator Norteño, who is this fucking LARP on Twitter who runs around getting people suspended, including me, including other people, probably Hi-Fi as well. Yes. And so this guy swoops in all of a sudden in March of 2015, the same day Louise does, and is like, yes, this Alpha Bank shit is totally sus. Here's a bunch of confusing charts and graphs to make you think it's sus too.
I'm sorry.
And fucking Louise and Conspirator and the whole resistance starts churning this shit up, right? So that goes on for a while. None of it goes anywhere. In the meantime, Trump is fucking breaking the law and committing treason in public. Mm-hmm. And we're screwing around, like dicking around with the numbers on these DNS logs. Mm-hmm. That's intentional. That's on purpose. Mm-hmm. And so anyone who participated in amplifying that, especially early on, has explaining to do. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it's not done. The greatest beneficiary of this nonsense is Mike Flynn and Donald Trump. Donald Trump immediately picked up on it and was like, they're spying on me. The Democrats are spying on me. In the olden days, in a strong country, they would execute people for that. He said it. He said that. Based on this bunky DNS log op, right? So this goes on. Now Mike Flynn gets a hold of it. And all of a sudden, John Durham gets hired by Bill Barr in 2019. And John Durham doesn't find jack shit except this. So if you see John Durham out there on Twitter or wherever, that's what this is. John Durham, Sussman, like, all the Hillary shit, including Elon Musk. Elon Musk just did it. Fucking 2 days ago.
Yeah.
3 days ago when you'll see this. He used this particular same bit of disinformation to troll Hillary Clinton after he decided that he was a member of the GOP death cult.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's important about this, right, is how single bits of disinformation can get blown up into entire conspiracy theories on both sides. Mm-hmm. So there's a very important sort of principle here that people need to understand. Real conspiracies are very often shielded by false ones, right? That's what this is. There was a real conspiracy to steal the 2016 election. It happened in public. Mike Flynn paid $28,000 to Brian McCauley in order to prop up the FBI reopening investigation into Hillary's emails, which swung the fucking election, right? That's what did it. Not some goddamn server in, wherever the Alpha Bank was, like randomly pinging an email server at Trump Tower. That's nonsense, and it's designed to confuse you. So whenever you see this Alpha Bank nonsense, know that this came from an intentional disinformation hop on the left, anonymous researchers who look just like Conspirator, by the way. Where was he?
Yeah.
Anyway, so you need to know that that's what this is. And the thing about it is they are using this in the same way that they're using the big lie. Right? And it's deadly serious. It's deadly. They are going to use this to continue to split the left, and Elon Musk jumping into this fray is real bad news.
That's right. And that is your biggest red flag for those of you who are trying to follow along. Jim, thank you so much. I got more DMs and messages from people who read that story today than anything. They were just like, they always were like, this was always fucked up, and now it finally makes sense. I just want to say two things before you go on. One, where I come from, we call this controlled opposition. Louise Mensch plants an op-ed in the New York Times about that. Guess who else planted an op-ed in the New York Times back in 1996? William Safire, calling it was called Blizzard of Lies, calling Hillary Clinton a black widow and casting all this shade, which began the cottage industry of casting her as a liar and a black widow. It was in the New York Times. He said if he was wrong, he would, eat his words and apologize. He never did. And, 25 years later now, we're still stuck with this kind of crap. So the New York Times has some explaining to do as far as I'm concerned.
That's a common process, right? Like Elizabeth Holmes had her editorial come in the newspaper.
It is.
It's a very common tactic, isn't it?
Wow.
But Louise Mensch was uniquely dumb, right? Like uniquely obvious.
Yeah.
Sorry, but seriously, it took it. If you're paying attention, it takes a little bit to figure it out. But she's just making up dumb stuff, and she's literally the godchild of the father of Brexit.
Yeah.
Like the guy who ran the Russian op to split UK from the EU, and that's what it was. Make no mistake.
Yeah, and William Safire was at least a Nixon speechwriter. But when you're talking about Soviet era tactics, which is really when we talk about controlled opposition and this kind of planting of disinformation, falsifying, this is a big thing that Soviet era, Cold War era, spies did. They would actually plant fake documents. And I just want to read one thing because I think this is germane to what you're talking about. When I was understanding how Soviet era spies would parasitize disinformation, you guys might remember the Soviet Union helped launch Indian newspaper Patriot with KGB funds in order to spread Soviet propaganda and disinformation. This newspaper was used to break a seminal in the history of Soviet active measures news item on alleged U.S. government involvement in creating AIDS. They are still doing that type of stuff now. I think your story is an example of that. And actually, Reagan got them to stand down by bigfooting Russia at that time.
Well, if you want to see Russian disinformation, look at monkeypox.
Yeah.
Right. Same play as with AIDS. Right. I think this time may be a little different because I don't think they caused AIDS, which I think is a different scenario than monkeypox. But that's for a different episode.
Yeah, we'll explore that further. Hi-Fi, you want to say something before Jim goes on to his next item?
I have one thing to say about, all right, I am a technology professional. I have been doing technology for 20 some years. I understand technology better than probably 98% of the people who will see this. But here's the thing I find. Every single time the right makes these technology claims, right? If you think about Mike Lindell and his packet captures, I know what packet captures are. I've read packet captures. He never had any packet captures. You look at this Alpha Bank DNS stuff. Okay, there could have been traffic, but there's no port numbers. There's no data packet. It sounds spooky, but there's no there. And the final one I want to point out, and actually, Sean, you sent me this information, right? This is the Hunter Biden laptop story.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
A year and a half ago. The Hunter Biden laptop. Okay, great. Where is, and they have to create something called a digital forensic image, right?
Yep.
Where you take an image of a laptop and then that can be, that can be put into evidence in court. Yeah. They have not produced one for the Hunter Biden laptop. And now that they've produced a sort of image of the laptop, it is being out there. It is out there. It is being hosted. But even the people who are hosting it, distributed denial of secrets, they're like, we're hosting this, but this does
warning.
not look
Yeah.
real. This
Yeah.
looks like bullshit, right?
This has
And
been tampered
that
with.
is and that's exactly right. They're making things up. It's not real. They're creating these artificial rabbit holes to mess with people.
I think the thing with the laptop, just to be clear, is that it's actually Hunter Biden's laptop.
It's real.
But they put shit on it.
Right?
They manipulated it, right? Which is different than manufacturing it. Which is important because reclaiming my time. It's exactly the same thing that happened with this DNS bullshit, right? They're real logs. They just blew them up and put shit on them and manipulated them to seem all scary and suspicious.
They made a story.
So just a final piece of the puzzle that just happened today, which is a very frightening development. So as everyone knows, I follow Mike Flynn very carefully. And today he posted something that's of a different character than the things that he's posted before. He has always sort of created this layer of deniability between himself and his actual goal, which is the violent overthrow of America. Violence. That's what he wants. It's been that way for 6 years. But today he posted something that is different. It is a direct call for violence against the U.S. government and against the cult's fellow citizens out in the open right there. So I'm just going to play like 10, 20 seconds of this because I want you to get the flavor. You can see the rest of it on my Substack, and I have a giant warning on it. But it's important to see, where their heads are at.
And as a vanguard of freedom in this nation, freedom will survive you. And not only survive, it will thrive. So guys, it's time to put on our packs. It's time to fix those bayonets. It's time to get ready. We got a fight on our hands. And our fight is not for us, for all those generations that's going to come behind. Let's save America, folks.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
All right.
Holy shit.
WGA is where we go one, we go all, meaning that this is QAnon's doctrine now. What I didn't show you is reenactments of the Washington's Revolutionary Army murdering British soldiers by the hundreds, which is the image that's being put forward while he's talking about American revolution today. And you'll notice in the most cynical part of it, it is being narrated by what sounds like a black man, and that is intentional projection and disguising of what they want, which is white
race war,
ethno-state, and the genocide of black people, Jews, and everyone else that they hate. So I think, again, there is no more mask here. They are not hiding anything anymore, and somebody needs to fucking do something in the government, otherwise it's going to happen.
Agreed.
Wow, Jim, that was so powerful and so important. And we ask this question all the time. Why is this man free? Why has he not been arrested? We used to call this treason. He's trying to stir up a civil war in service to Putin and whoever else he probably is in debt to. Oh my God. Thank you for that very, very powerful hellscape. And now I'd really like to ask our viewers to join us as we introduce you to Paul Niland, somebody I've been trying to get since February 24th. He lives in Kyiv. Every time we scheduled an interview with him, he would be in a bunker somewhere, a bomb shelter, or he'd be on his way to go get a bulletproof vest or some goggles, because even though he's in his 40s, he's ready to fight this war if needed. And thankfully, he's a reporter. He's also the founder of Lifeline Ukraine, which is the very first suicide hotline and mental health services hotline for people. And it was born out of all the revolutions. He's Irish, but he lives in the Ukraine. And it's been his home for 19 years. And so he calls himself Ukrainian. Because we had to schedule this around the 10-hour time difference, only Hi-Fi and I were able to do the interview. We hope you join us, and let's bring him in. Paul Niland, I'm so grateful that you are joining us from Ukraine. You are in the heart of this right now, and you've been reporting from this incredible country during this incredible time. And can you tell our viewers a little bit more about your background?
Sure. First of all, I'm happy to join you for this conversation, Heidi. It's always nice to see you and to chat with you. My background is, yes, I'm a writer on Ukrainian affairs. As you just mentioned, I'm published on various different platforms like the Center for European Policy Analysis, the Atlantic Council, and a newspaper in the UK as well publishes me regularly. But my background is that I'm Irish by birth, but I'm Ukrainian. I've lived in Kyiv for close to 20 years now. This is my home, and I became a writer about Ukrainian affairs simply because I care so much about this country, and the story of what has been happening here since 2014 needed to be told from a Ukrainian perspective in the English language, and that's something that I've tried to do to inform people about the nature of this conflict, how it began, and write about the early days of how this happened, and also write about the revolutions and the other momentous experiences I've had since I've been living here.
It's incredible how many people that I've met in the fight for democracy and for truth to continue to see sunlight, how many people just sort of got recruited and rose to the occasion and found themselves doing things that they didn't necessarily anticipate. And it'd be great if you could brief our viewers on Lifeline Ukraine before we get into some of the heart of what I want to talk about, because I think it's amazing that you formed the first suicide hotline and mental health group to help people who had already been through various revolutions prior to the kinetic phase that we're seeing right now.
I'll happily talk about Lifeline Ukraine. I'm exceptionally proud of what my team and I have built over the last few years that we've been operating. But there was something in the lead up to your question that I just want to reply to, because you mentioned this fight for democracy. And that is what this is. And I wrote an article, in actual fact, for this British newspaper, and they retitled it Vladimir Putin's existential problem with Ukraine. But what I wrote was I wrote an outline of what I see are Putin's reasons for this war. What Ukraine is it is a democracy, a genuine democracy where we have democratic competition, where we have a free press enabling that democratic competition, and where since the Revolution of Dignity, which finished in 2014, we've been working out ways of closing the dark corners where corruption thrives. And for those reasons, that's why Vladimir Putin cannot allow Ukraine to exist as it does, because the model that we present is the greatest challenge to his authoritarian, kleptocratic, corrupt rule that anybody has ever presented. That's why he has a problem with us. But Lifeline Ukraine is our national suicide prevention hotline. I was volunteered to take responsibility.
As we are.
As we are. Well, it came after an email. Dr. Ulana Suprun was the acting Minister of Health at the time, and she just said, bring Paul Niland into the next meeting on this. And so that was the beginning of the story for Lifeline Ukraine. I recognized why we needed this, and we needed it for two reasons. One is that every country must have a suicide prevention hotline. They simply must have one. They are, a standard feature everywhere, and we'd never had one. Right. But number two, the primary audience, the people that we wanted to provide support to first and foremost, were members of our armed forces, the people who have been fighting in the Donbass since 2014, since the spring of 2014, when Russia's invasion of mainland Ukraine actually began. It didn't begin on the 24th of February. Right. We've been fighting this war for a long time, and have, prior to this phase of the war, almost 15,000 casualties as a result of it. So that's who we created Lifeline Ukraine for, and it now serves the entire country and anybody who requires our support, whether that person has a connection to the military or not, though almost all of us in Ukraine do have a connection to the military. We'll take calls from, and we'll help anybody who finds themselves in a time of emotional crisis. And I'm so grateful to my colleagues for the work that they do when they're manning the phone lines, and they're there. We operate obviously around the clock. They're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and just helping complete strangers who will call us up in a dark moment and need some kind of help. Maybe it's just, maybe it's a person to listen to them. Maybe that person is lonely and they want someone to talk to. So yeah, we help. And again, I'm exceptionally proud of what we've built together.
Well, also, I believe that the numbers have really shown how valuable this is, that when you started this hotline, were among had the highest level of suicides in any democratic country, I believe, and now the numbers are actually going down and in the right direction. So I think the data actually proves your point. Certainly, and
just before we launched, I was preparing. I had to give a presentation to a roundtable at the Verkhovna Rada, which was about veterans' rights and veterans' affairs. And I found out, researching for that presentation, that at that time Ukraine was 8th place in the world in terms of the number of lives lost by suicide. Wow. And about that's a tragic figure. That's the reality of our situation that Lifeline Ukraine is trying to address. And then about 9 months ago, I was preparing for a meeting at an embassy. And decided to look up the statistics and see where we are, or look up that chart, that ranking table, and we're no longer in the top 10. And I don't mind admitting to you or anybody who's watching that when I found that piece of information, I shed a little tear. I was exceptionally pleased with seeing exactly that. I mean, like seeing in real terms the effect that we're having on this issue.
Yeah, it's incredible. So war is hell, and our show is a investigative show that focuses on disinformation. And I've been an investigative reporter pretty much my whole life and whole career. And Hi-Fi is really an incredible OSINT investigative researcher and data brain. And so we have an opportunity to talk to somebody who is in Ukraine, which I've been trying to do and trying to get this interview with you, to tell us what's really happening from the point of view of somebody who is not a shill for the media. And I say that because even the media that we trust, I read a piece, I'm not going to say the paper because I actually really treasure this paper, but a media that we trust, they are still printing Russian fucking propaganda. Mm-hmm. There's still there was an article about, oh, Russia's so excited because it's going to be recruiting, older soldiers now, and isn't this so great because we're going to have such lovely experience. And fuck that. If you look back at World War II, by the time they started recruiting all the Altacockers, it's because they were fucking losing. So it's a blessing to have you here as an unfiltered voice for truth. That's how I view people like you who are doing the work of democracy. But what can we really kind of wake up our viewers with? I have a concern, and my concern is that we've got an election year here in America. And all of a sudden, we're not talking quite so much about this very fucking important war, which is an attack on the West and democratic values. And Putin won't stop there. And I'm going to stop here because I've just thrown a lot at you. But whatever comes to mind, we'll start, we'll just start with whatever is top of your mind. That our viewers are global, but we'd like to get people sort of
okay, so this latest call that now they're going to be recruiting Russian men aged 40 and over, this is not the first attempt to reconstitute Russia's land forces, to give them sufficient strength, at least in numbers on paper, to continue their advance. What happened prior to the 24th of February, and it happened over a period of more than a year in actual fact as well, was Russia kept building up and building up and building up this force. And the last figure that I remember seeing prior to the all-out invasion, which didn't obviously include just land forces, it included airstrikes and missile strikes and so on, but there were 190,000 troops, Russian troops, on Ukraine's border and in occupied parts of Ukraine. When the all-out invasion began, I mean, they had various different strategic targets, Kyiv being one of the first, Kharkiv being one of the first, Mariupol being one of the first, and then the area that is the land bridge between Russia itself and Russian-occupied Crimea. So they were all the initial goals, and they really stretched Russia very, very thin on the ground. They managed to grab hold of a lot of territory in the south to give the appearance that they've secured this land bridge, but it is only an appearance. But they've lost something like 1/3 of their combat forces, 1/3 within 3 months. And that means that the fighting force that remains is no longer sufficient for further land grabs through a typical kind of land war, kind of backwards and forwards. Right. And so, one of the things that we heard them doing was, because obviously Assad, a fellow war criminal in Syria, is an ally of Putin. And we heard that Putin was going to be recruiting mercenaries from Syria to come. That failed. The next thing was that they were talking about, there were floating trial balloons about a general mobilization in Russia. And they understood from the reaction to that the balloon was going to be made out of lead and that they could not do it, which is why we averted the declaration of all-out war on the 9th of May, because the only purpose for doing that was the mobilization, and they know that it's just not going to be successful. Then they started advertising short-term contracts, and the jokes from the Ukrainian side were very short-term, And then last week, the next one that I saw was that they'd got 2,500 reservists that they'd called up that were in training to go into force to go into Ukraine, like 2,500 reservists. Yeah. And now it's Dad's army, right? And I'm also in my 40s. I consider myself to be I am in pretty decent shape actually, but. I can't imagine that Putin's dad's army is going to be changing the trajectory of this war anytime soon.
Oh my God! I know Hi-Fi's chomping at the bit to ask questions. We're going to start taking turns, but I must say that words are so critical in an information war. And when you start doing things like Dad's army, and you start saying things like that, and you start referring to what these events really are, and stop using the Russian propagandist terminology like separatist fighters, whatever it is, it's all, we just have to get so much stronger with our language. So you just gave us something fantastic for the arsenal, Dad's army. Any way we can cast shade and actually stop using these words that are not effective enough in an information war. And as well as obviously a real war is so freaking critical.
Or terms that are simply factually incorrect, and you just use one of the best examples there, separatists, right? And people in good faith helping to promulgate and propagate Russia's narratives. If you actually look at how the conflict was created in the Donbass, there is no history of separatism there. It wasn't on the cards. It wasn't a discussion like Scotland or Catalonia or anything like that, right? I mean, there was probably a longer debating period to talk about Calexit than there was about, you know, the Lugansk People's Republics before they sprang up. But as an example of how the media have become so welded to certain terms, right? In about, I suppose, 10 days into the war, something like that, the elected mayor of Kherson was being taken away by people with automatic weapons, right? He was kidnapped. And we've seen lots and lots of examples of this now over the last 88 days. But 10 days in, and I'm watching a certain international broadcaster, so, you know, describing this situation. They've got video, and she's like, and there he is. That's the mayor being led away by the separatists. And I'm like, hang on, Kherson is 530 kilometers away from Donbass, right? If you've been sucked into this thinking that maybe there was local agency, maybe it did start from some kind of separatism there in the Donbass, not 500 fucking kilometers away. You know, that's the Russian army. And that is what people should be saying. And to put a final cap on that before we get into other questions, you know, it has long been known, and I mean, there's research that supports this. There is evidence that has been provided, including from organizations within Russia. Like, you know, the Boris Nemtsov did a report which was called Putin.war, right? And he was preparing for the publication of that report when he was assassinated. And then it was published by his partners and colleagues shortly afterwards, including Vladimir Kara-Murza, who has survived 2 assassination attempts from Putin. But simply that report, and I forget how many pages it is now, but that report was proving Russia's involvement Russia's involvement in and guilt in creating the war in the Donbass. Right. Yeah, and so, you know, there's information out there. You don't have to be saying separatist. We know that it's all Russian equipment, Russian command and control, even if there are local fighting units. It's Russian command and control. Therefore, it's an extension of the Russian army. Full stop. That is the Russian army. That's who we're fighting.
And this is the part where I just revel in saying that former Fox News producer Jack Hanna was arrested in London for building out a pro-Putin propaganda network, for Volofiev, who was indicted for his role in just that, in financing that. So I'm always excited when we see a little bit of activity on the horizon. I've got a dozen questions, but hi-fi, I've been hogging the floor here, so you go.
All right, so Paul, one of the questions I have is, you know, we talk about the perception that people have of the war and the separatists. You know, everyone knows in Crimea, the little green men, that was probably Wagner, private mercenaries. Now we see private mercenaries in the eastern part of Ukraine committing these horrible atrocities. What has been the Ukrainian response to this? And do you know, is there a Russian truth response to this, like saying, oh my God, look at what we're doing, we should not be doing this? How is the reaction on both sides there to this horror?
So again, the substance in that question, which I really want to reply to. So when we talk about Wagner, we should always use the hanging air quotes again with private military companies, right? Russian
military.
Yeah, because who created Wagner? Wagner was created by Yevgeny Prigozhin, who is Putin's chef, who is a billionaire. Because he is awarded Russian state contracts, for example, contracts for the maintenance and upkeep of Russian military facilities, right? So Prigozhin is awarded his money from the Russian state, from Russian state contracts, and then he spends that money in return on doing the dirty business with Wagner. And for example, he also funded the St. Petersburg troll farm that we all know causes us so many problems on Twitter. So, you know, the purpose of Wagner, it's designed to be like an arm's length, plausible deniability. There's something going on, but it's not the Russian army. It's these private contractors. And oh dear, shrug shoulders. It's nothing to do with us, which we've just debunked. It is everything to do with the Russian state via Putin, Prigozhin state-funded contracts, right? But we see Wagner being employed throughout Africa as well. Like a lot of their activities in the Central African Republic and other countries have been exceptionally, not disturbing is the wrong word. I mean, they're committing war crimes there too, right? They are guilty of summary executions and raping people on the territories that they control and so on and so on. The purpose of Wagner is to be this plausible deniability so that they can go and commit atrocities, and it can't be assigned, the guilt, the blame can't be assigned to the Russian government. But what we're seeing here in Ukraine more and more is that it is the regular Russian army that is also going around and systemically, the cases that we hear, people talk about Bucha, people talk about Mariupol, they're the two big names that have become implanted in people's minds, but it's everywhere. Yeah. Everywhere where the Russians are occupying and where we see them withdrawing from, we see exactly the same thing. Some of the first stories of multiple rapes that I heard were from Kherson. Everywhere the Russian army is, they are committing atrocities at the same time under the direction of the military hierarchy. One of the military groups who were proved to have been responsible for the raping, looting, and executions in Bucha, Irpin, and Hostomel, those three territories that are very, very close to each other to the north of Kiev. One of those units, after they were withdrawn from the battle in Kiev, after we won the battle for Kiev, they were given an award by Vladimir Putin. Their entire regiment was honored as war heroes. And it's a deliberate fuck you to the West, isn't it? They know that there's war crimes being committed. They just gave, in actual fact, posthumously another award to a guy whose nom de guerre was Motorola, Arseny Pavlov. Decided that he was a war hero too. He was executed about 3 years ago, something like that. And again, when I see the reporting on that, and people are saying, here's another award given out by Putin for somebody who, was a militia commander in the Donbass, all the international reporting misses the fact that he's a Russian citizen. He was a Russian citizen. He's now a citizen of nowhere. He's dead. He's 6 foot under. But he was a Russian citizen from Rostov. How can someone call him a Donetsk People's Militia leader when he's not from Donetsk?
Yeah. Well, we know we're dealing with a mafia state. When we had Tomas Ilves on our show, he reached behind him and he said, if you really want to read the best history book on Russia, Mario Puzo wrote it, and he grabbed Godfather off his shelf. And that was super helpful. Again, things like that type of framing is super helpful, which is why I'm in agony when I read news reports from legitimate news sources, and they're few and far between, as you know. I'm in agony when I hear the propaganda words and the Russian, seeded point of view, which is inevitably linked with propaganda. It's not, they're always at war. It's what Paul Mason taught us. What Trotsky said. You may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. And we are not. The West has not been fighting back because we haven't even fucking declared war. We're still kind of running around while we have been under siege in one way or another, whether it's kinetic or non-kinetic. We have been at war. I'd like you to tell me, there's so many things. And again, we're already, this is how fast it goes. We're 30 minutes in and I'm looking at my list of questions, but I'll try to prioritize my questions.
We're only 25 minutes in. We're only 25 minutes in because you forgot to press the record button first.
Thank you.
That's it. We got 20 minutes left. All right.
Full disclosure, Connor is not here to run tech, so it's left up to the girl, and she had a little bit of trouble with that. So there's a number of things that are concerning me. War is shit for the environment. The fossil fuel industry always profits off of war. The friends of the fossil fuel industry always gets the contracts to rebuild. I always see fuckery afoot. I look and kind of zoom out going, who's profiting? What's really happening? Is this one guy or is this a cabal? And I would like you to perhaps speak on that first before I come down a couple other questions down.
So the only way that I can respond to that positively and talk about something literally constructive. I listened to a really, really interesting debate that was hosted by the US-Ukraine Business Council almost 2 weeks ago, and our former finance minister, Natalia Yaresko, was the lead speaker. And she was talking about the rebuilding, the reconstruction project and budget for Ukraine after the war, and what that's going to look like. And a good part of the discussion was centered around the parties that are going to be contributing to this, whether it's a Marshall Plan or whatever other form this rebuilding budget takes. How will those parties be assured, with Ukraine's reputation as having issues with corruption, how will they be assured that their monies are being spent as they're intended to be spent? And what Natalia was talking about was a thorough and rigorous and international system of checks and balances. So it's almost like a new ministry for reconstruction, post-war reconstruction, needs to be created, and that ministry itself would have its own police forces or investigation forces. I through Lifeline Ukraine, I deal with the international donor community as well. I know what the reporting requirements are like. If I want to buy a new photocopier, I have to, if not want, if I needed to buy a new photocopier, then it's multiple bids from different parties and all that kind of stuff. That kind of transparency is going to be very needed. We fortunately have a system of transparency for government procurement, which is called ProZorro, which saves the taxpayer in excess of $1 billion a year, compared to how things were back in the Yanukovych days of plundering the state budget.
Yes.
We're going to have to pay a lot of attention to that to ensure that people who shouldn't be profiteering out of the reconstruction don't. Right. That's as far as I can go, I think, on that one.
Yeah, no, it's important because I look at it and it's like I tapped out of the war, the war and oil economy some years ago. I kind of looked at what was happening in Trump, Russia, Trump, America, and I'm like, this is all freaking, the fossil fuel war industrial complex. Now we've got the disinformation industrial complex. We've got the outrage industrial. We've got all these terrible things, and I tried to remove myself from it. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to stay removed. But I do think, like, who's the Halliburton in this? Why are oil CEOs profiting in record numbers? Cashing out 99, just millions and millions, if not billions, in stocks. And so it's always a concern to me. Hi-Fi, I see you want to say something. So your turn, my turn.
Okay.
Your turn.
So, I'm big on following the billionaires because I firmly believe that money can drive opinion, money can make things happen. And two of the Ukrainian oligarchs that I know relatively well. One is Medvedchuk, and he is in prison now. What were his crimes against Ukraine? What exactly did he do from a Ukrainian point of view?
Treason.
Treason.
Yeah. Treason. Yeah. That's very much. I'll happily give you the details about Medvedchuk. What was the name of the second oligarch, just to prepare me?
The second one was a fellow, and the reason I know this one is he actually he owns some property here in Ohio. One was a factory that burned down, and another was some downtown buildings in my hometown, Kolomoisky.
Okay.
And Sberbank, I believe it is. There was some funny business with Sberbank, or a Ukrainian bank, that there was money laundering and dirty stuff going on.
So Kolomoisky owns not Sberbank, but owned Privatbank, which was Ukraine's largest private bank. I think something like 70% of the country has or had accounts in Privat. So that's a big story. Medvedchuk's treason. The organization for the OCCRP, Corruption and Crime Reporting Project, I think it is. They did a really good expose 4 months ago. And I think you just need to type in OCCRP and then Medvedchuk or pipeline, and you'll find it. But essentially, they describe the process through which Medvedchuk was handed control over various assets, again, in the hydrocarbon field. He was handed over control of these assets for fractions of what they're actually worth. And then once he was generating rent from them, he took that money, which was essentially gifted to him by Putin, Putin being the godfather to Medvedchuk's child, right? And Dmitry Medvedev's wife being the godmother to the same child as well, right? I mean, that's how close they are. But Medvedchuk took that money and he then created various propaganda outlets here in Ukraine that were seized and closed in the lead up to this war. And you know, again, like we look at the international reporting and certain figures on the right in the United States of America as well, we're using that fact to say that Zelensky is an authoritarian. Here is one of his principal political opponents, and he's closing down his media outlets, and he's doing this and he's doing that. It was about national security. It was about stopping Russian-funded propaganda from hitting Ukrainian airwaves, and Medvedchuk will be judged. We can say he's alleged to have committed treason, but he will, in the full course of events, be found guilty of treason as well. Mr. Kolomoisky, together with his business partner in Privat, a chap called Gennady Bogolubov, when it became clear, many banks in Ukraine are run by oligarchs as essentially their pocketbooks. They want to use them for all kinds of things. That could be for granting preferential loans to connected firms, which sort of illegal. You're not supposed to do that. But anyway, or just simply the idea of ripping off all the depositors when you finally decide to close the door and run away. So when it became clear that Privatbank was looking less and less solvent, and international investigators were brought in to look at the situation, in the final months before Privat was nationalized, taken out of the hands of its private owners, there was $5.5 billion that was embezzled out of the bank through various different schemes, including these insider loans to connected people, to former bank management, senior management, and they literally just had a field day stealing as much as they can. And then it was the Ukrainian taxpayer who had to come back and foot the bill at the end of the day for the bailout that kept the bank afloat. The bank was too big to fail. It couldn't be allowed to fail. But ultimately, I'd like to see Kolomoisky get some justice as well.
I just did a whole thread with our financial correspondent, who's the former IRS criminal investigator, on just that subject, pegged to Deutsche Bank, but not exclusively on the too big to fail, or are we too corrupt to deal with our own corruption? It's very difficult. Thank you for that. That was really cool, Hi-Fi. And we're just trying to figure out what are the most important. I have like 3 questions I want to jam in at the end here. You wrote your latest for Byline Times predicts what happens next. Can you tell our viewers what you think that might be?
Yeah. Again, if we go back to what I was saying earlier on about this idea of a land corridor along what is the Azov Sea coast in the south of Ukraine. The Azov Sea coast runs from what is now destroyed, ruined Mariupol on one side to Crimea on the other. And again, that's about 500 kilometers. Russia has always prized that piece of land because they cannot supply occupied Crimea from mainland Russia. They built that bridge across the Kerch Strait. There's not enough bandwidth there to properly supply, especially with the militarization of the peninsula that we've seen in the 8 years under occupation. And so they needed this land bridge. And so the names of the cities along that piece of coast are names that have been known to me for some time. Everybody knows Mariupol now. People are starting to hear about Melitopol a little bit. Nobody's heard yet of Berdyansk, but really those are the 3 big population centers. And it's 500 kilometers. And so what's necessary now and what's happening right now, in actual fact, maybe when you air the show, you can put up a map of Ukraine so that people can see this. But the reason why the Kherson region was taken is because that's directly north of Crimea. And so the Russian strategic calculation there is, if we grab more of that part of Ukraine's land, our occupation of Crimea is therefore more secure. It isn't, but that's what they believe. But then from Crimea and Kherson to the north, you go towards Mariupol and you find, first of all, Melitopol, and then you will find Berdyansk, and then you find Mariupol. And that's all there is there, right? So in the early days of the war, Russia was able to paint on the map on CNN a lot of red in that area, but it's very, very unsecured. There is no way, with the offensive force that they put in there, there's no way that they could, for example, plan an actual border and think about enforcing that for the next, not even 20 years, not even 2 years. Like, they cannot hold on to that land. They cannot protect those temporary gains. So looking at the kind of military equipment that's coming into Ukraine, the kind of vehicles that are coming into Ukraine as well, I think as fast as the Russians rolled across the Azov coast, I think Ukraine is not as fast, but relatively quickly going to be able to move through those swathes of land. What Russia is now looking to do, and actually this is a piece that we should talk about, because there's a lot of dangerous talk about ceasefires right now. We see this Italian peace plan that's just come up, right? Yeah. A ceasefire at this point is a gift to the Russians, because it essentially hands them these territorial gains that they haven't earned, they haven't secured.
That. That's right.
Fuck that, exactly.
Fuck that,
exactly.
Fuck that.
So what is going to happen is that Kherson is going to come more and more into play in the coming weeks. And then from the liberation of Kherson, then it's a clip along to Melitopol, a clip along to Berdyansk, and then we're knocking on the door of Mariupol. Yeah. What is going to happen, I believe, is that the momentum from the Russian side, do you know what they're trying to do in Lugansk at the moment, for example? They're trying to soften up a village to be able to use that as the forward operating base to be able to destroy Severodonetsk. That's it. Like, that is the extent of their current attack, not even capability, but like they can't think any further ahead than that. It's like this village, and then we'll be able to destroy Severodonetsk, right? They've been kicked away from the areas around Kharkiv. They lost resoundingly in the battle for Kyiv. They're being pinned down in the Donbass. They're going to be routed and returned in the south. And then at that point, I do not see Ukraine's military stopping at the contact line that existed on the 23rd of February. The entire Donbass region and the people of the Donbass are going to welcome it, because they've lived through 8 years of shit and incompetence and hell as their regions have deteriorated. In fact, I've got an article I've written about Mariupol, which I'm waiting to be published right now. But I wrote that Mariupol actually, when Donetsk city itself was occupied, Mariupol became the regional administration for the Donetsk region, for the government-controlled parts of Donetsk. And then Mariupol developed and reformed. And so Mariupol has been destroyed because it was essentially a mirror on what Putin had done to the DNR, right? Those spaces have just atrophied. They have collapsed. They are withering. They are dying. Mariupol was flourishing, and now it's been destroyed. But the drive to get the Russians back across the internationally recognized border and out of mainland Ukraine, I believe that's going to be done militarily. And then I believe what needs to happen with Crimea is some kind of international administration. The military land grab in February of 2014 of the Crimean Peninsula was the greatest challenge to the international rules-based order that the world has seen for a very, very long time, right? I mean, you might talk about Northern Cyprus 1974. There's a lot of nuances about what happened there, but the annexation of Crimea was the first military shifting of borders within Europe for decades, right? And for that reason, and to return the world to the international rules-based order, That has to be reversed. It doesn't matter whether Putin is still in power or whether he's already, hanging from a lamppost or whatever end finally comes to him. The sooner, the better, right? The annexation of Crimea has to be reversed, and it's going to require that international temporary period of administration before it's returned to full Ukrainian control. Not so much because the locals in Crimea are going to object necessarily. They're largely apolitical and they really don't care who it is that's governing them, though many of them, including obviously the Tatars, are going to be pleased to be not being repressed anymore. But the people of Crimea won't care. What they need is that period to be deprogrammed from the zombification that has happened from subjecting them to Russian propaganda for all of these years. That's why we need this transition period.
Yes, you just said a mouthful. Hi-fi go, then I'll get the last question in.
Okay. We have this zombification here in the United States that's also a problem. And one thing I don't understand.
A bad case of it.
A bad case of it. One thing I don't understand about the international community, the EU, NATO, the United States, everyone, we have been letting Putin get away with murdering journalists around the world, murdering informants against him. Look at Litvinenko, right? We put up with his propaganda. We put up with people who support his propaganda. He's got Orban, he's got Lukashenko. It's obvious there's a network. I mean, look at Schroeder just left Rosneft, Gazprom. What can the international order do to crack down on this bullshit? Stop Putin from, I would love if Putin was dead tomorrow. I don't think that's going to happen. And how do we know the next guy's not going to be worse? We have to stop this. How do we stop this?
Putin, he's KGB, right? Sorry, my apologies. I was almost saying former, right? He is KGB. All that he can do is to get himself involved in manipulating people and capturing agents, and that's what he knows. That's what his training is, going back to the Cold War. So if you look, for example, we know what the problems are with the situation in North America with people buying propaganda there, and Rupert Murdoch has got an awful lot to answer for there. But that's another thing. But if you look at the UK, there are two major political parties in the United Kingdom. There are the Labour Party and there are the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party can be bought by making contributions to the Conservative Party, by people going to charitable events and paying for a game of tennis with Boris Johnson and all those kind of things. That is going on, and that has been going on. The way that they managed to infiltrate the Labour Party, though, was far more subtle and insidious, and they did it through a group in the UK horrendously named the Stop the War Coalition. So people who refer to them accurately call them Stop Some Wars Coalition, because they'll happily protest if NATO is involved in an action somewhere. They all go out and say, "Oh, this is terrible. We shouldn't be doing this," right? But they've never said a word in 8 years against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So they're very selective, right? Yeah. But one of the former, I think he was the chairman of Stop the War, was the previous leader of the Labour Party, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn, right? And through his associations with that organization, he ended up taking in two senior advisors, one a man called Andre Murray, and then another guy by the name of Seamus Milne. And both of those people advising the leader of Her Majesty's opposition have stated pro-Russian points and have parroted Russian propaganda. So at exactly the same time, the Russians had managed to capture large parts of the Labour Party movement and the Conservative Party movement. And now, obviously, they're repeating that and playing both sides as well in France with Marine Le Pen, in Italy with the various people they want to support there. You just mentioned Schroeder having resigned from his position. In America. The former Austrian, I think, foreign minister, who had Putin dance at her wedding, similar kind of, was brought in and given a massive salary to act as a front. That's the kind of shit that we need to stop. That's right. That and revoking broadcast licenses to Russia's propagandists, and then looking at like the Navalny organization has a list of 1,000 Russians that should be sanctioned internationally. Take that as a good start. You know, they're the kind of things that we can do.
Yes. I mean, it's as simple as like Estonia, the former president of Estonia was telling us they don't allow anonymous, you know, shells to buy real estate. We've just, you know, we've created, it's a disaster of our own making, and our, what's legal has been continually weaponized against us. And so that is, everything you said is so profoundly important. There's so many things I want to say, but I'd like to give you something, I'd like you to leave us with something beautiful. And what I mean by that is, we hear a lot about the spirit of the Ukrainian people, and it seems like there's probably no better people to be fighting this fight right now, because in America, we're too busy fighting each other. So one, what can you tell people about the spirit of the people in this place you call home, and then how can we help?
I'm going to tell you just one little story, and this is something that actually happened on Friday. So we're all helping in whatever way we can, right? And from time to time, I'm asked whether I could pass over a piece of equipment, or, you know, there's lots of vehicles being donated into Ukraine, and, you know, to help the Ukrainian armed forces. I've done a little bit of this, I've done a little bit of that, and I was asked to pass on Friday a bulletproof vest to the mother of somebody who had been in service previously in the Donbass, and he was going back, and so I said, you know, sure, just give her my number, she can call me up and we'll meet up. She phoned me. She called me and she said, "How long will you be home for?" And I said, "About the next 2 hours." She phones me 2 hours later, apologizing to me because she was going to be 20 minutes late, right? And as I hung up the phone, I thought to myself, her son is going off to war, and this is the thing that she's fretting about right now, that she's keeping some stranger waiting for 20 minutes. And when she finally turned up, then, you know, she was there together with her daughter, the sister of the guy who's going off to war. They're all, you know, "Thank you very much for doing this. It's very, very kind of you. Here's a bar of chocolate. You can't not accept this," right? And just that little story sums up, it sums up Ukrainians for me. The man who's going back to war, the mother and the sister who are supporting them, and her mentality of not thinking about, she's already used to it. He's already been deployed once, but thinking about someone else. You know, these people here in Ukraine, they are the most giving and kind and generous people. And that is their consideration for first and foremost. That's why they're so friendly. That's why I love making this place my home. But the flip side of that kindness is, if you take advantage of them, these people are just fucking amazing warriors. And those fucking amazing warriors, they've had 8 years of experience at this, and I work alongside them, right? Many of my colleagues are veterans, and now they're back on the front lines defending their country. You know, I know these people. I know how they tick. I know how their minds work. I know how their hearts work. And if you dare to come to their home to threaten their families, you will understand, as the Russians are now understanding, what warriors the people of Ukraine are.
Amen. Amen.
Just wanted to let that breathe.
Yeah. Personal favor. If you talk to the Klitschko brothers, send them my love, will you? I'm a boxing fan, and I love those guys. And the fact that they didn't run and they stayed there, and they're like, "Bring it on, bro. We're gonna go." That just, you know, they're millionaires. They could bounce, but they didn't, and that's amazing.
You know, not just them. I forget the chap's name, but there's a Ukrainian member of parliament who's also an Olympic champion, who's also in weightlifting. He's also going to go and fight. Musicians like Andrei Hlivnyuk from Boombox, like the guys who won the Eurovision Song Contest, like the guys from Anti-Tila. You know, there's very, very, very good friends of mine. People have taken up arms, and they've gone to do what was needed of their country. And yes, full respect to the Klitschkos for having done exactly that as well. And them and a lot of Ukrainian parliamentarians and various other people as well have become absolute heroes in facing that constant call for press interviews. And you know, it is draining. I know myself because I've done many of them, but you know, it is draining, it is exhausting, but that is a part of their service to their country, as well as being in a plate vest and having weapons in their arms from time to time. They're doing phenomenal jobs of explaining our position here and explaining how we're feeling as we're coming up to now 90 days of war, all out war.
Wow. Well, we are so grateful that you spent this time with us, and we will be thinking of everything you said, and we will be sharing this with our viewers. And stay safe. I wish your family, you know, love and safety. And I hope that we all get through this, because I just don't think that we have any good options. We have to fight this.
The liberation of Ukraine is going to lead to the downfall of Vladimir Putin, and those are both good things.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you for leaving us with that, Paul.
Let me leave you, if I may, with one final thought, actually. I wrote another article in the very, very early days of the war, and the working title was Vladimir Putin's Achilles heel, because I knew, like, I mean, we're in day 3 of the all-out invasion, that their body count was going to be enormous. And I believed that as that news seeped out into the Russian public space, when those people understood how many of their husbands, sons, fathers, brothers have been killed, that was going to be the tipping point that brings people onto the streets and eventually brings Putin down. As we come towards 90 days of war, that figure is going to top 30,000. 30,000 Russian sons dead on Ukrainian soil. They never should have came here. They never should have came here.
Now you guys see why I spent 3 months trying to get that interview with Paul Niland. Do anything you can to support the people of Ukraine. They are fighting on behalf of democracy, and we need to be their allies in every single way. Thank you so much, Paul Niland, for coming on our show. And please come back next week, because Connor is working on a super crazy and wonderful digital descent.
It's an origin story. Let's just say that. I haven't been inspired in a few weeks, so that I have now, and then it's an origin story. We'll leave it there.
Yeah, it's an origin story on somebody who just got voted the hell out. So we're going to kick them on the way out, put it that way.
See you guys.
Thank you so much. Love you guys.
Night.